Ethan and Clara Lewis looked like the perfect newlyweds, young, in love, and ready to begin their dream honeymoon in Santorini. But behind Ethan's charming smile hid a temper that burned with jealousy. And behind Clara's gentle laughter was a growing fear she couldn't escape. What began as a romantic getaway in paradise soon spiraled into a nightmare of control, rage, and tragedy. By the end of their trip, the same man who once swore to protect her would become the reason her life ended. Ethan and Clara Lewis were the picture of perfection when they stepped off the plane in Santorini. Two onlookers, they looked like the couple everyone envied, young, beautiful, newly married, and hopelessly in love. Ethan, tall and muscular with sharp features and an air of quiet control, walked slightly ahead, pulling their luggage with brisk confidence. Clara followed closely behind, her sundress fluttering in the warm Mediterranean breeze, her soft smile glowing with hope. She had dreamed of this moment for months, a honeymoon in one of the most romantic places in the world, where white-walled villas overlooked blue seas that seemed endless. To her, it was the start of forever. To him, it was something entirely different. Their love story had begun like a movie. They met at a gym in Chicago where Ethan worked as a personal trainer. Clara, a shy artist, had joined to get fit before her upcoming art exhibit. Ethan had noticed her immediately, the way she focused quietly, how she avoided the mirrors, how her presence somehow calmed the room. He liked control, and she was the kind of woman who seemed easy to guide. Within weeks, he'd charmed her completely. He brought her coffee after workouts, complimented her paintings, and made her feel seen in ways no one else had. 4 months later, he proposed with a diamond ring so large she gasped through tears. Friends said it was too soon, but Clara dismissed them. She was in love. Their wedding was simple but beautiful, filled with laughter, soft music, and whispered promises. Ethan had been attentive, almost protective, guiding her hand, leading her to dance, never letting her drift too far from his side. Clara thought it was affection. In truth, it was possession. Even then, he watched who she spoke to, who looked at her, and whether she smiled too long at anyone else. But she never saw those early signs for what they were. Love, she thought, was supposed to feel intense. The honeymoon had been Ethan's idea. He wanted somewhere quiet, romantic, far from people. Just us, he said, with that confident grin that made her heart flutter. And Santorini was perfect. Their villa overlooked the cliffs and glittering water, the kind of place that looked unreal in photographs. On their first evening, Clara stood by the balcony, gazing at the sunset melting into the ocean, her heart full of peace. Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, but there was tension in his grip, subtle, yet there. She didn't notice the way his eyes followed the waiter who brought their wine, or how his smile faded when she thanked the man politely. He said nothing that night, just held her tighter than usual. For Clara, it was still a dream, the kind she'd always wanted to live in. But beneath that dream, cracks had already begun to form. The air that smelled of sea salt and jasmine couldn't hide what was growing between them, a darkness quietly taking shape behind Ethan's handsome face, waiting for the right moment to surface. The first few days in Santorini seemed almost perfect. The couple explored cobbled streets lined with bright blue doors, took pictures by the cliffs, and dined in candlelit restaurants that overlooked the sea. To anyone watching, they were just another honeymoon couple, lost in each other's company. But Clara began to feel a subtle shift in Ethan's behavior. It wasn't obvious at first, small things, quiet moments that carried weight. He started to control their schedule, deciding where they would go, what she would wear, even what she should order. When she hesitated, his smile would tighten, and his voice would lower, calm but edged with authority. On their 4th day, they visited a popular viewpoint crowded with tourists. The atmosphere was full of laughter, camera shutters, and music drifting from nearby cafes. Clara, in her flowy white dress, leaned over the rail to take in the view. A local man, a photographer offering to take pictures for couples, approached with a friendly grin. He asked if they wanted a photo together, and Clara instinctively smiled back. Ethan's expression darkened instantly, his jaw clenched, his hand gripping her shoulder too tightly. The photographer, noticing the tension, quickly backed away. Clara tried to brush it off, but she could feel Ethan's mood shift like a shadow creeping over sunlight. That night, silence filled their villa. The sound of waves crashing below the cliffs only amplified the distance between them. Ethan barely spoke during dinner, his eyes fixed on his plate. Clara tried to lighten the mood by mentioning how beautiful the day had been, but her words fell flat. When they returned to their room, he checked her phone under the pretense of wanting to see the photos she'd taken. She handed it over without protest. He scrolled through her messages and photos slowly, his face expressionless. When she asked what he was looking for, he simply said he wanted to make sure everything was fine. The next morning he woke up early, pacing near the balcony. Clara could sense the unease but didn't know how to reach him. She told herself he was just tired, maybe stressed from travel. They had planned to visit a nearby island that day, but Ethan abruptly canceled, saying he didn't want to be surrounded by strangers. He insisted they stay inside and spend time together. What sounded romantic at first became suffocating as the hours passed. He followed her every move: when she walked to the kitchen, when she sat by the window, when she opened her sketchbook to draw. Clara felt something deep inside her begin to change. The excitement that once filled her was fading, replaced by confusion and quiet fear. She missed the Ethan she thought she knew, the charming, funny man who had made her feel safe. But in the bright sunlight of Santorini, that man seemed to have vanished. What remained was someone colder, watching her too closely, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. The paradise around her now felt like a cage, and she didn't yet realize how dangerous it would soon become. The tension between Ethan and Clara continued to grow with each passing day, and the once magical island began to feel smaller. The beauty of Santorini no longer felt peaceful, it felt haunting. Every morning Ethan would wake before dawn, staring out at the sea for long stretches of time, silent and withdrawn. Clara would watch him, uncertain whether to approach or stay away. His mood could shift in seconds. What began as tenderness could twist into irritation without warning. The smallest things, her tone, her smile, even her silence, seemed to provoke him. On their 6th day, they decided to visit a small beach on the southern coast, a place famous for its red cliffs and quiet waters. Clara hoped the change of scenery might help ease the growing strain. They rented a scooter, and she wrapped her arms around him as they rode along winding roads that overlooked the ocean. For a brief moment, it almost felt like before the wind in her hair, the scent of salt and flowers, the thrill of adventure. But as soon as they arrived at the beach, reality crept back. Ethan watched her constantly. When she walked toward the shoreline, his gaze followed like a shadow. She noticed him stiffen when a man nearby smiled in her direction. It wasn't flirtatious, just a casual gesture between tourists enjoying the sun. But to Ethan, it was unforgivable. His hand tightened around her arm as they walked back to their towels, leaving faint marks on her skin. She didn't say anything, afraid of what he might do if she pushed back. That evening, Clara sat by the villa's balcony sketching the sunset, her only escape from the tension that wrapped around her like chains. She heard Ethan behind her, moving restlessly inside the room. The atmosphere felt heavier than ever. He began asking questions about the men she had looked at during their trip, his tone calm but unnerving. He wanted details: where, when, why. Clara tried to reassure him, to explain that she hadn't done anything wrong, but her words seemed to make him angrier. He told her he couldn't stand being disrespected. He said she made him feel small, like she didn't value him. Each word carried more venom than the last. Clara sat frozen, unable to respond, realizing that nothing she said could fix what was breaking between them. The love that once held them together had turned into something dangerous, something rooted in control, jealousy, and pride. That night, she barely slept. The sound of the waves below seemed louder, almost mocking. She thought about calling her sister back home, but Ethan had taken her phone earlier to charge it. She lay there in silence, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the heavy footsteps pacing across the floor. She had no way of knowing that the line between fear and danger had already vanished, and the next time Ethan's anger rose, it would not end with words. The following morning, the villa felt eerily quiet. The usual sound of birds and the laughter of tourists from nearby terraces seemed far away, muffled by the tension that clung to the air. Clara moved carefully through the space, trying not to disturb Ethan, who sat by the window staring out at the endless blue horizon. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't spoken since the night before. When she asked softly if he wanted breakfast, he didn't answer. The silence was worse than anger. It carried something darker, something that made her stomach twist with unease. She tried to focus on simple things, packing her sketchbook, tidying the room, but she could feel his eyes on her. Every movement she made seemed to trigger suspicion. When she looked out at the view, he asked who she was looking for. When she smiled at the housekeeper who passed by their villa, he muttered under his breath. Clara began to understand that nothing she did would ever be right in his eyes. The man she had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone unpredictable and cruelly possessive. Later that day, Ethan suggested they go out for dinner at a small restaurant by the water. His tone was calm again, even gentle, and Clara felt a flicker of hope that maybe things were improving. She dressed carefully, choosing a modest summer dress and tying her hair back neatly. Ethan smiled approvingly, which eased her nerves for a moment. They walked together down the cobblestone path toward the restaurant, hand in hand, the setting sun painting the sky orange and gold. To anyone passing by, they looked like a loving couple enjoying a romantic evening. Inside the restaurant, the mood was light and cheerful. A guitarist played soft music while candles flickered on every table. For the first time in days, Clara allowed herself to relax. She even laughed quietly when the waiter brought them complimentary wine. Ethan's face softened, and for a while, they talked like they used to about their plans, about returning home, about the art gallery Clara wanted to open. But that calm didn't last long. When the waiter returned to refill their glasses, Clara thanked him politely, and the man smiled in return. A simple, harmless exchange. Ethan's expression shifted instantly. His eyes hardened, his jaw tightening as his hand gripped the stem of his wine glass. The rest of the meal passed in heavy silence. Clara could feel the storm building behind his calm exterior. They walked back to the villa under the moonlight, the soft sound of waves crashing below the cliffs. Ethan walked ahead this time, his pace fast and uneven. Clara followed, her heart pounding. She sensed something was coming, but didn't know how to stop it. When they reached the villa, he shut the door behind them forcefully, his composure shattered. The accusations began again, sharp, venomous, endless. She tried to reason with him, to calm him, but it was too late. His rage was no longer something she could talk away. It was the kind that didn't fade. It was the kind that destroyed. The night air was thick and heavy inside the villa, pressing against the walls like the weight of something unspoken. Ethan's voice filled the room, rising and falling like waves in a storm. He accused Clara of disrespecting him, of embarrassing him in public, of looking at other men as if he didn't exist. His words were slurred with anger, his hands trembling not from fear but fury. Clara stood frozen near the edge of the room, trying to keep her distance, her heart pounding so fast it hurt. Every time she tried to speak, his rage only grew louder. She took a step back toward the open balcony door, hoping the fresh air might calm him, but he followed, closing the space between them. His face was red, his eyes wild. The man who had once promised to love and protect her now looked like a stranger. She could smell the bitterness of wine on his breath, could see the way his jaw tightened each time he spoke her name. He told her she had humiliated him, that she had made him look weak. Clara shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. But he didn't stop. He kept moving closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that sent chills down her spine. When he reached her, the argument turned physical. It happened so fast that Clara barely had time to react. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her, as his words became harder, sharper. She pleaded with him to calm down, but her voice was barely a whisper over the sound of his anger. She stumbled backward, her heel catching the edge of the rug, and he advanced again, his face twisted with something darker than jealousy possession. To Ethan, love was control, and losing control meant losing everything. The confrontation escalated. She tried to break away, to run toward the door, but his grip tightened. The struggle moved across the room, toward the glass table, where her sketchbook fell to the floor, its pages scattering like leaves. The sounds of the sea outside and the chaos inside blended into something surreal. There was a final shout, a crash, and then silence. Moments later, the villa was still. The lights flickered softly, the curtains swayed in the warm night breeze, and Clara lay motionless on the floor. Ethan stood over her, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his mind racing to make sense of what he'd done. It hadn't felt real, until that moment, till the reality of his actions hit him like a wave he couldn't escape. The woman who had once loved him unconditionally was gone, and the paradise they had come to enjoy had turned into a nightmare. He stood there for a long time, staring at the lifeless figure on the floor, the echo of his own breathing filling the room. Panic finally set in. He tried to wake her, to convince himself it wasn't as bad as it looked, but there was no response. The villa that had once been filled with laughter was now silent. The sound of the ocean below the only reminder that life still existed beyond those walls. Ethan sank to the ground beside her, realizing too late that his love had turned to ruin, that there was no way back. The sun rose slowly over Santorini, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, a cruel contrast to the darkness that lingered inside the villa. Ethan sat motionless on the cold tile floor beside Clara's body, his mind blank and his heart pounding in slow, uneven beats. The night before felt like a blur, a storm of anger, shouts, and confusion that ended with silence. Now, that silence was unbearable. He stared at her face, pale and still, and the weight of what he had done began to crush him. Every breath felt heavy, every thought scattered. The woman he claimed to love more than anything in the world was gone, and it was by his own hands. For a while he didn't move. He tried to convince himself there might still be life in her, that maybe she would open her eyes if he called her name, but the truth was undeniable. Panic began to set in. He looked around the room, noticing the overturned table, the shattered glass, the broken pieces of their honeymoon scattered everywhere. The sound of the waves outside felt louder, almost mocking. He had destroyed everything in one night. As the minutes passed, his fear shifted to desperation. He began to think of ways to cover up what happened. Maybe he could make it look like an accident. Maybe no one would ever know. He lifted her carefully, placing her on the bed and arranging the blanket over her body as if she were just sleeping. But the stillness of her chest betrayed the truth. He paced the room, his hands shaking, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the cool morning air. His thoughts became wild and erratic. He imagined the police, the headlines, the judgment. The man who couldn't control his temper had lost everything. By mid-morning the hotel staff knocked on the door. They had noticed the couple hadn't come down for breakfast. Ethan didn't answer at first. He stood there, staring at the door, torn between confession and denial. When the knocking grew louder, he opened it halfway, forcing a weak smile. But his pale face and trembling voice raised suspicion. The staff insisted on entering, and within seconds, the illusion fell apart. The moment they saw the bed, their gasps filled the room. Ethan froze, unable to speak, as the world around him began to collapse. The police arrived within minutes. The investigation moved quickly. The evidence was clear. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle with an outsider. It had all happened between them. Ethan was arrested on the spot, his wrists bound as he stared blankly at the ocean through the open balcony door. Cameras flashed as he was led away, and the story spread across the world within hours. A tragic headline about love turned lethal on a dream honeymoon. In the days that followed, the villa was sealed, the news replayed endlessly, and people who once envied their perfect love story now spoke of warning signs. In his cell, Ethan sat in silence, haunted by memories of the woman who had once trusted him completely. The paradise that was supposed to celebrate their beginning had become the setting of their end. And as the world moved on, one truth remained: love, when mixed with obsession and control, can turn even the most beautiful moments into something deadly.